overlapped at Facebook. We worked together on the same team on Portal. And then you went on, you were Eng director working in data infra. You quit Facebook and now you're actually sailing the world. And I feel like that's a typical path for someone enjoying leadership, right? Like usually they'll go off and do a startup, they'll go join another big tech company. This is kind of just out of my own curiosity, but can you share why did you kind of leave Silicon Valley and become a full-time sailor?
All right. Well, I guess it's a long story. I didn't start off in Silicon Valley. I mean, my career started off in the UK and Europe. And I got to Silicon Valley maybe 10, 15 years ago. And, got really, I would say, lucky joining Facebook in its relatively early days. And had a great run. Stayed there for over 10 years. Did a bunch of things, which I'm sure we'll get to talk about. But I came up on my Faceversary, which is what they call the annual kind of anniversary of a joining. And, it was my 10th Faceversary. And the kids were just about to leave home and just kind of reached this set of milestones. And I was like, maybe now's the time to kind of turn the crank on another chapter of my life. And I was really still enjoying my time at Facebook. As you know, it's an awesome company to work at for personal development, and obviously the engineering culture is spectacular. But I felt like my learning curve was starting to flatten out just a little bit. And, one thing that I really kind of yearn for in my life is a nice steep learning curve. So I figured, well, what better way to enjoy that again than to go into something completely new, which for me was moving on board a boat and basically learning how to sail it in anger and start traveling longer distances. So my wife and I moved on board. The boat is called Scout. And we've been sailing since 2022. And I mean, it's mind-blowing having to kind of take care of all the things that, a complicated boat requires, and, keep it maintained and figure out where you're sailing, and obviously look at the weather and plan your passages and all the rest of it. And it was just spectacular intellectually. It doesn't sound like it's an intellectual exercise, but it really is, right? Keeping all these things top of mind. And so for me, it was just this amazing journey to go back to the beginning of a learning curve and learn this whole new set of skills. And the good news is that my engineering kind of world is still present, right? I can still get online, I can still work on open source, I can still write code on my laptop.
Though you have been traveling around the world, I think you're docked right now, but throughout your travels, you've actually still been deep in technology, right? So you started open source project called TinyBase. I am curious if you could, was that something you had in your mind for a while, or that's something that you just thought of more recently?
Right. Well, firstly, I should just say that I'm born to be a builder. There's something innate in my DNA that makes me always want to be creating something, right? Ever since I was a kid, I've been programming computers. So the idea of just getting on board a boat and doing nothing, I'd go crazy. So I still had to have that in my life. And TinyBase as a concept was something that I'd been kind of mulling on for a little while. I'd been kind of tinkering around with some ideas, but then I figured all of a sudden I'm going to have this extra sort of a reservoir of time that I can build on and build with, and that's what I decided to invest into. And so for those that haven't come across it before, TinyBase is a JavaScript project. It's a reactive data store that you can run in memory in an app, and it's very suitable for what we call local first apps, where the data is right next to the UI, and in contrast to a kind of a more cloud architecture. And so you've got this little database that's storing your app state and your app data right next to the UI. It makes it really easy to build beautifully fast applications. And then TinyBase takes care of all the whatever asynchronous synchronization to a server or whatever else in the background. And I will say that living on a boat where I'm often offline or I've got pretty bad connectivity has really kind of brought home to me the idea that local first apps have got an interesting future where you're not completely dependent on the cloud. You ought to be able to have some sovereignty over your own data regardless of whether you're on or offline. And there's a bit of a movement happening right now in the web development and the mobile development space around local first. And I thought TinyBase might be an interesting thing to push on here and see how it goes. And over the last 2 years, it's grown pretty strongly. Got a whole bunch of integrations with other databases. Got a whole bunch of kind of UI components to it as well. And I think the interest on GitHub is strong, and the adoption seems to be growing. So I'm pretty happy. There's always that kind of prioritization question of whether you're spending your time? Should I be figuring out how to sail on to the next place, or should I be just finishing off this software release? So I've often kind of got to juggle these things. But yeah, no, totally.
I think one of the things that, one of the themes of the course that we'll talk about later is build something that you actually use or you would use. And I think you followed that advice exactly with TinyBase. I think for the majority of your career, tell me if I'm wrong, you've actually been on the other side where instead of maintaining an open source repository as a creator of it, you've been contributing, right? Like you've been submitting pull requests to existing projects. And I think the majority of people watching also will likely be more on the contributing side rather than the creating side. I'm wondering if you could talk about if you have broad advice on, some engineer going up the ladder in their career, they're interested. Would you recommend they start like a brand new project, or would you recommend, trying to find something where they might be able to have some value?
Well, this is a super interesting question, and you mentioned the course that we've just put out on Taro, and that's one of the topics we cover. Should you try to identify an existing project or set of existing projects that you feel you can contribute to, or should you take the plunge and launch something new? And I would say that launching something new is super rewarding, but it's very hard work, and it's kind of all or nothing. The risk is pretty high. I've got the time, I got the experience, I can persist with something like TinyBase and keep working on it. But if you're doing, say, open source contributions in your spare time, or you're just using it as a way to expose yourself to lots of different systems, or expose yourself to lots of different programming patterns or different parts of the stack, then yeah, you're probably going to do better if you kind of identify a handful of projects that you'd like to participate in, or even just one, right? And just to maintaining that, it's already got some momentum. It's already got some adoption and some usage, and you can kind of fit in there. And again, one of the things we mentioned in the course is that a lot of the skills you learn when you are getting involved with someone else's open source project are the same skills that you're going to need when you go and join a large company. So in that sense, it's good training. It's kind of like a sandbox for practicing. And it's things like joining a project where the code isn't very well documented, joining a project where you're not really sure what the users want, and joining a project where, there's lots of work going on in flight. There's issues and pull requests all over the place. Well, I can promise you, when you start work at a large tech company, it's going to be exactly the same. You're going to have to really figure out what's going on. And if you've had a chance to kind of get your head around some existing project, that's good practice for the professional world.